You must gather your party before venturing forth.
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome. I'm Josh Strife Hayes, and in today's video I'm going to talk about the tabletop role-playing game Dungeons and Dragons, what it is, why you should play it, and how to play. This video is aimed at people who have never played before. Maybe you've bought some of the books and are unsure on what to do next, or maybe you've seen Dungeons and Dragons on TV or in films or in general media and are curious about what it's all about. Well, don't worry, I'm going to explain absolutely everything you'll need to know. Let's start with the basics. What is Dungeons and Dragons? At its core, D&D is a group daydream. It is a system used to tell a collaborative, collective story created by the players themselves. It's best experienced with a group of between 3 and 6 people, although you can add more. You may have seen Dungeons and Dragons using complex rulebooks or odd-looking dice or ancient maps or expensive tabletop miniatures, and while all these do enhance the game, they are by no means essential. Dungeons and Dragons, at its very core, is a storytelling system, and all of these additions, the books, the models, the maps, they all enhance the story, but they don't make it. At its very core, Dungeons and Dragons is a group of friends telling a story. Dungeons and Dragons isn't a tabletop battle game, although there may be elements of that involved. It isn't a political intrigue game, although there may be elements of that involved. It isn't necessarily a political deduction game. It isn't a game where you win, although there may be a victory condition for your specific group. Now, this might sound really complicated and contradictory in nature, but it boils down to the fact that because it is a story game, it can be as simple or as complicated as your group wants it to be. A quick history of D&D to get you guys up to speed as well. Dungeons and Dragons was written and created by two guys, Gary Gygax and Dave Arneson, in 1974. Now, role-playing games and tabletop battle games did exist before D&D, but that was the first time the magical phrase Dungeons and Dragons was written down, used, and codified. Now, over the years, various editions have been released. First edition, second edition, advanced D&D 3.5. So when you hear someone say, oh, I like Dungeons and Dragons, but I only like second edition, or I only like 4th edition, we are all essentially talking about the same game. We're just talking about various small versions of rule changes over the years. At their core, they're all just about telling stories. Right now, we are on 5th edition of the rules, often shortened to 5e. This video introduction and all guides that I put out from now on will be based around 5th edition, or 5e, although the general concepts can be used for any tabletop role-playing game. Right, so now you know a little bit about what it is. It's a storytelling system, and you know a little bit about the history and where we are with the additions. How do we play? What do we need? Maybe we need all those books and all those character sheets and all those dice and all those spell cards and... No, you don't actually need anything at all. You can tell a story with nothing. We've all been telling stories since we were children. We've been playing make-believe since we were kids. Be honest with me, how many of you have daydreamed about what you would do if a load of armed men broke into your workplace while you were there? What would you do? Or what would you do if you're in line at the bank and suddenly robbers burst in? Or how would you escape from a burning building? We've all gone through those fantastical scenarios in our head before. We've all ran through the stories where we are the hero. Well, Dungeons and Dragons is just doing that, but with other people involved as well. It's a fantastic adventure that you share with your friends. If you're still with me and you're thinking this all sounds really fun, then you are correct. It is, and if you want to start a Dungeons and Dragons group, there are a few things it's advisable to get. By no means are these essential, but if you've not played before, they are very, very useful. The first thing you should look at picking up as a group is the 3 core books. 5th edition uses 3 main books to codify and create the world. It's very important to understand that these are not rule books. They are not designed to be followed exactly to the letter. They are suggestion books. They are guide books. Rules are not what make the game fun. Rules are what keep the world consistent and a consistent game is a fair game. If one player can do something but another player can't for no particular reason, that's not fun, that's not fair. So these are guidelines, and by following the majority of the guidelines, we keep the games fair. However, you can speak to your dungeon master, and we'll explain what they are later, about breaking or going off the guidelines. Don't follow this to the letter, follow it to its spirit of storytelling and adventure. The first book you should look at getting is the Player Handbook. This will give you an absolute wealth of information about what kind of character you could play in your Dungeons and Dragons game. Now, as a player, you are the hero of the story, but you're not the only hero. You're joined by your fellow players who are also heroes. There's no main character in Dungeons and Dragons. You are part of an ensemble cast, a member of an adventuring party. The character you play in Dungeons and Dragons can be as similar or as different from you as you like. You don't even have to play a human. The Player's Handbook contains every type of race you could play as. Elves, orcs, goblins, dwarves, many more in various supplemental books, even one you could create by talking to your dungeon master and coming up with something brand new and ingenious. It also has lists and suggestions for what class you could play as: fighters, wizards, rangers, bards, and loads more. This book is your guide and your portal to all the information you could need to create an incredible character. Again, it's not a rule book, it's a guidebook. But if every player collectively agrees to follow the guides, then the game remains fair and consistent. Player's Handbook also has gorgeous artwork and lots of written fictional histories about places, people, or items. The Player's Handbook is mainly for the players, but the Dungeon Master's Handbook is for the Dungeon Master. The Dungeon Master, or DM, is a very special role to play, and I'll explain more about them later in this video and in depth in a separate video. Just know that you are the one who watches over the world, controls the non-player characters, and keeps the gameplay interaction fair and consistent. The Dungeon Master is not against the players. You don't win if the players die. You are the referee. You are the story guide. You are the impartial overwatcher helping the adventure progress. This book contains all the hints and tips for being a Dungeon Master of a 5th edition D&D game, along with a load of information on items you could find and hints, tips and tricks on how to create incredibly unique scenarios. And finally, the Monster Manual. This book contains hundreds of monsters you might find on your journey to fight or befriend, listing each of the monsters' names, types, and some incredibly beautiful artwork that shows you what the monsters could potentially look like. Now, you don't need to use this book. This is a guide, not a rule, but as a dungeon master you could find a creature you like in here and then adapt it to fit your game. We'll talk more about combat later, but the Monster Manual is a great book for helping you add enemies to your game, or a great place to start if you're looking for inspiration. Once you've got some books, you'll need some dice. Now, Dungeons and Dragons uses a lot of unusually shaped dice you may not have come across before. When we talk about dice, we always say the letter D, meaning dice, and then a number afterwards, referencing the number of sides that dice has. You've probably all seen the famous D6 before, a simple cube dice with 6 sides. But Dungeons and Dragons will also have you using a D4 with 4 sides, a D8 with 8 sides, a D10, 12 and 20. Now, it's useful for every player to have their own set of dice to make rolling dice quicker, but you can just have one big set of dice that you share across the table. Just try not to step on the D4. It hurts more than Lego. So you've got a group of, let's say, 4 people. You've got a copy of the 3 core books between you, you've got some dice, you've sat down at a clear table, and you are determined to play some Dungeons and Dragons. What else do you need? How do you start? What should you do or not do? I know it's intimidating, but I'm going to answer every single question you've got, either in this video or specifically in a few future videos. Let's start simply. Let's talk about the Dungeon Master. The Dungeon Master, or DM, is a vital part of a D&D game. As a Dungeon Master, you are the creator of the game world. You are the controller of every non-playable character, or NPC. You are the rules arbiter. You are the first and last authority on exactly what can and cannot happen in the game. And your word is law. The DM can veto any decision and override any rule, even if the rulebook says otherwise. The DM is, for all purposes of the game, God. It is therefore very important to understand that the DM and the person who plays the DM must be a kind and fair God. I personally have played the Dungeon Master in many games of D&D, and everyone has different styles of being the Dungeon Master, but I see the role of the DM as having a few core rules. Firstly, you're there to keep the world consistent. Fictional worlds only work if they have consistent internal logic, and the players can easily pick up on this. If, for example, one of your players gets bitten by a rat, and you decide that player should take 1 damage, that's fine. If another player then gets bitten in exactly the same way by the same rat, and that player takes 50 damage, that's not consistent, and so it's not fair. You are there to keep the world consistent, and if you do so, the players will thank you. Your second role is to facilitate the story. Now, how dramatic and how performative you want to be is entirely up to you as a DM, but you'll be responsible for narrating the actions of the players or the NPCs, describing the locations and situations you end up in, and acting out the scenarios. A DM with great acting skills and high energy can bring the game to life and create unforgettable moments for the players. It is vital to remember, however, that as a DM, you are not telling your story. You are telling the story, the one created by the players and the NPCs that you are playing as. Many players that you speak to, I'm sure, will have a horror story of a DM forcing the party to do something or pushing the party in a certain direction because the DM was too focused on telling their story. We refer to these events as railroading, when the players feel unnaturally forced down a certain path because the DM wishes it to happen. We'll talk more about railroading and how to avoid it in the DM's specific video. And lastly, you are there to ensure the group is comfortable, both inside and outside of the game. And this is probably one of the hardest parts of being a DM. If one player dislikes another player in real life, that can spill over into the game, and it's your job to make sure it doesn't, or to limit its effect as much as you can. It's your role as a DM to make those tough choices, to help bring everyone together, so the players will look to you for guidance, both in-game action-wise and real-life relationship to the group-wise. It sounds odd, but I guarantee it will happen. You will be, as a DM, placed in scenarios and situations that you're not sure what to do, both in-game and with a meta-narrative about the players themselves. And I will help answer as many questions, as many queries as I can when you're in that scenario. A great reference for any DMs that want to try is the Reddit page of Roll20. I'll link it in the description. Don't be afraid to give DMing a go. It's very, very rewarding if you can do it well. If you're not the DM, you are a player character, or PC. As a PC, you're only really responsible for your actions, and you don't need to worry about anyone else. Although it's a kind and courteous thing to ask and be aware of how all the other players are acting and feeling in game. But ultimately, you are only there to focus on the actions, thoughts, and feelings of your specific character. We'll talk more about good and bad things you can do in D&D as a player character in the player character video specifically, but if you just want to take on the role of playing through as a certain character, representing that adventurer and going through their journey, going with them, making decisions in the game world, seeing how the story unfolds, pushing it in one direction, interacting with other people, fighting monsters, if you want to be the hero of the story, then being a player character is for you. So here's the scenario. You're sat round a table. You've all got your rule books, your bags of dice. The The Dungeon Master is ready to begin. You have your player character sheet in front of you. You know who you're going to play. You know what kind of adventure you're going to go on. You're excited. If this sounds like the kind of thing you'd want to do, then you'd probably enjoy Dungeons and Dragons. I can't explain everything in this video, but this is a brief introduction. If anything I have said sounds remotely interesting to you at all, then you should join millions of gamers in playing Dungeons and Dragons. I will teach you about 5th edition specifically, but you can take these techniques to any edition and use them then. In the next video, we'll talk about being a player character or being a dungeon master and beginning an adventure. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much for watching. My name is Josh Strife Hayes. If you'd like to join me live on Twitch, I'm there every night. twitch.tv/Josh Strife Hayes. If you have any questions about Dungeons and Dragons or role-playing in general, please feel free to leave a question and a comment down below on YouTube, or come and ask me live. I'll do my absolute best to answer every single one. Look out for the next videos on how to be a dungeon master, how to be a player, how to create maps, how to be an effective wizard, and everything in between. Until then, gather your party and venture forth.